I want to go over an approach that you can use in order to help with characters that are walking towards or have a large amount of foreshortening and perspective applied. So you can use tools like DOIK, which are amazing for things like side shots, and then you can augment them so that they create a sense of foreshortening, but it can be quite tricky if you get quite extreme foreshortening. And what I've done here is I've created an animation showing everything built up using cylinders and a couple of feet sort of slapping down on the floor there. It's a bit extreme in regards to foreshortening, but it shows the general idea of how you can build up your character using basic forms, and I've used it here to draw over the top of. So I've just drawn a pair of trousers here and I've just used it for reference, and then going back to After Effects I've used it as the basis for creating this pair of legs. And all these are cylinders that are, if I go into the leg here, I've just created one leg which I've then duplicated in the final duplicated and flipped and then offset so that it goes left leg, right leg. So if I go to the leg here and then if I click on one of these cylinders and just double click on that, all I have is a cylinder that swings from front to back and has a level of perspective on it, so it's pointing towards, swings around and then points away. I then in the leg create a controller which controls the upper and lower cylinders. So if I take these, I can just control these and swing the cylinder forwards and back like this, and the same with that one. And the lower leg is parented to the upper leg. Now it's not perfect because it's just a rough thing, and if I swing a cylinder like this one here using the leg control, the other one's not going to go with it. I have to reposition that every time, and neither does it have inverse kinematics, but it is something that is just useful for creating characters and certainly working out perspective and foreshortening on characters, and also giving you an understanding of how things behave when things are pointing forwards and pointing away, things like the scale and the foreshortening. It's not perfectly accurate perspective, it's just really there as a basis, and it's something that illustrators and artists will use using cylinders, cubes and spheres in order to be able to build their characters up. And in this instance I've created a character which gets a bit more complicated, which is this guy here, using the same principle where I've got legs that move forward and back like this, or leg parts that move forward and back, if it'll let me do it. And I've got an arm that moves forward and back, and I've built up a character which then runs when the RAM actually works. Just give it a sec. So it runs on the spot and uses that foreshortening. So this is just a basic kind of character that I've got using that system. It's not perfect, but it just gives you an idea of how you can approach that animation of a character running towards and break it down into easier parts in order to animate it. So what I want to do is go over how to create the cylinder, the basic cylinder that I've used in my initial animation, and I've then used to draw over the top of. So it's simple to put together, but if you get the steps wrong it can be annoying, and there's a couple of things that can trip you up along the way. So I'm just going to create a new composition, 900 by 400, and what I'm going to do is use solid layers. So I'm going to create a new solid which is white. I've deliberately made my canvas grey so that the white will show up, and the key thing here is not moving the solid layer. I need to make a path, an ellipse, which I'm going to select that solid layer, and I'm going to move the ellipse, click and draw over the top there. And what I want to make sure is I'm moving the mask and not the layer, because if I move the layer around, you see that highlights and I'm moving the layer, then it means that things will go a bit funky, and I'll show you why. So let's say for instance I accidentally move the layer, and I move that to there. If I then go to animate the mask and move it around by double clicking on one of the squares, it'll run out of space because the layer, if I delete this, has been moved underneath it, and this is what confuses a lot of people. When they go to scale stuff, they use the scale tool and they might scale their ellipse down, and then they'll go back to the mask and move it, and then they'll find it disappears. So what we want to do is make sure that these transforms in the white solid are just left alone and that they don't change, and in that way I can move my mask around and it'll always stay white and won't suddenly disappear or do stuff that's weird. So it's the mask that we're keying. The other problem that we have sometimes is that with masks they can be really difficult and tricky to get hold of and move. Sometimes you select it, you think you're moving the mask, but in fact you're moving the layer by accident. What you need to make sure of is if you've got a mask path that you want to select, you'll see that it has little red squares, and those red squares there, or it's not red squares, it's the little, let me just check which one they are. It's the little blue squares, or the colour of the mask itself. So this is a kind of sort of bluey kind of colour here, and those are the squares that I need to click on. These represent the vector points of the mask. So if I want to manipulate these, now if I want to manipulate one, I just click on one and I can move it around. So I just click once if I want to select one of those. It gets tricky because unfortunately the red squares that show the overall bounding box of the mask appear as well, and that can be difficult because you can think you're clicking on those. What you're actually doing is looking at what the colour of the mask is there and make sure you click on those squares, and that will allow you to select the vector points of that mask, or the Bezier points of the mask, and that's where you've got the little handles and stuff. A quick shortcut for selecting the entire mask is just double click on one of those. If you get confused as to what you're selecting, double click away somewhere else on the canvas, somewhere on the screen. It'll deselect everything. Click once and you'll select the solid. Double click on one of the squares that belong to the mask and it will give you the transform there, and that's where you can move and you can transform and rotate your mask. So I've got this ellipse here, and what I want to do is I want to create my tube with it. So I'm going to double click on one of those points. I'm going to just scale it to the size I need it to be. I'm going to rename this to ellipse 01 by right clicking on it. I always leave the E off there. Oh, I keep doing that. Just going to change that to ellipse 01. I'm going to apply a stroke by right clicking, going to effect, going to layer style, sorry, clicking on stroke, and we will get a red stroke in here, which I'll turn to black, and I'll make it 6 points wide, 6 pixels wide, and I'm going to duplicate this ellipse. So I get ellipse 1 and ellipse 2. Now ellipse 1, I want to keep that staying where it is. I want everything to, imagine you're looking at the top end of a tube here, or a cylinder, and you're looking at the top, and all I want to do is just rotate this from its middle pivot point, and I want to give that effect by selecting mask path. Make sure you have that selected. If you select the mask path, the reason it makes it easier is because it just shows you these square points. You don't get any red points sitting over the top to confuse you. I'm going to key that in that point there. I'm going to go to the middle of my composition. I'm just going to make sure this is 1 second long. It's actually 2. So I'm going to go to 1. I've just made mine trail frames per second just for the sake of argument. It's going to go OK there. In fact, I'll make it 1.1 just to get that extra little frame at the end. So that's a second long plus a frame there. So I've keyed that at the start. I'm going to slide that to the middle of my composition of my timeline. I'm going to double click on one of those squares, holding down Shift Control Alt. I'm going to drag in from the side, and that'll squeeze the circle, the ellipse, to the middle. And then I take that key there. I'm just going to paste that, excuse me, at the end. So that'll be pasted at the end. I'm just checking I've got that frame in there. Okay. And I'm just going to shift that key to the middle. So it goes from being wide to being flat to being wide again. So what I'm going to do then, actually I'm going to delete ellipse 2 because I want to use a couple of these keys that I've already created. Just going to go back to ellipse 1 and duplicate that. And I'm going to hide the first ellipse. So I'm just working on ellipse 2, go to masks. And I'm going to take this point here, this midpoint, double click on it, and I'm going to drag this entire ellipse down to the end, to there. So what will happen is, it'll go from wide to thin, but to the end, and then back to wide again. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pretend that it has gone from big to small. So I'm going to double click on that. I'm going to scale it up to about there. I'm going to have to move these over a little bit just to correct them. Let's just move that, move it over. Swinging back, and then I'm going to take this one and scale it down. I'm going to have to do a couple of corrections. So what it looks like is, it's looking like it's close to you, swinging away from you, and then swinging back round again. In fact, I'm going to make that smaller. So it swings from close, away, and like that. And I think what I'll do is I'll just put an ease on this middle bit as well. So it does give the effect there, if I leave it like that, it looks sort of a little bit like the end of a lighthouse beam where it swings around and away like that. Now for the ellipse 1, which is the first one that we created, I'm going to make that appear again. Now what I need to do is just make a couple of adjustments. I'm going to just change the opacity on here, on this one, so I can see ellipse 1 underneath. I'm going to make sure that that is lined up with the center there. So this is effectively, if we were looking down on a cylinder, this is the bottom of our cylinder here. Then it turns, and then it's there like that. Now the question is whether I'm going to have to make sure that I just selected the path when I moved it, and I did, yes. Whoops, holding down shift, I'm going to move it to the middle. So it swings away and back like that. Let's just center it a bit better, like that there. So now I need to turn the opacity back up on this, so I've got that. I need to create the middle section of our cylinder here. So I'm going to grab in the cylinder side PNG and just drag it into here, and that is just literally a PNG which has black lines top and bottom and a white center. And I'm going to put in some corner pins. So if I go to distort in my effects and presets, and corner pin is just there, I'm just going to double click on that, and now I get some corner pins with this. So I'm just going to key these at this midpoint in the animation. Just going to open up the effects on the corner pins, and I'm going to drag these corner pins to the points to match up with the ends of the cylinders here, like this. And then halfway through the animation, I'm going to drag. I'm going to go to the first quarter of the animation, drag the corner pins so they match the cylinders roughly, and there. And then I'm just going to finally drag that there. It will look a bit distorted, and it's a bit of trial and error when you're doing it. So, and then the same thing again here. Going to drag these. And drag this to there, like that. So I have to kind of fill in a few of these because sometimes it doesn't quite match up. Just going to go back to this one. If you lose the corner pins, just go into a corner pin and select one of them and they'll all appear. Like that. So obviously what's happening there now is you get a sense of it being a cylinder, but obviously I need to rearrange a couple of things in order for things to be in the right place. I'm going to drag the cylinder down there so that at least for the first half it looks correct, apart from the obviously the lines are very thick. I might increase the line width on these cylinder strokes. Let's just get a layer style stroke. Let's just match these up. So it swings around, and then this second one doesn't quite work because the cylinder's still over the top. So what we have to do is take ellipse 2. We have to then do a bit of rejigging of some things. So I need to make sure that in the first half of the animation, ellipse 1 is underneath the cylinder side, but over the top in the second half. So I duplicate ellipse 1, I drag it over the top, and then I'm going to move the slider there, and there. So that's the side of the cylinder there. We need to make sure that in the first part ellipse 1 is underneath that side, and then in the second part it's over the top. And we also need to do the same for ellipse 2. In the first part it's correct because it's over the top of the side. Need to drag that to there, duplicate it, and put it underneath, so that the second half, just clicking and dragging on these ends, it goes underneath like this. So then you get the cylinder moving away like that. And in this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take cylinder side, just drag these corner pins just to correct them and tweak them, make it a little bit more accurate throughout the animation. Whoops. So that then starts to match a bit better. Let's just go to cylinder side and just match this up again. What I'm also going to do is, let me just check this one there. Could be because I've got easy ease on this one. Easy ease on the other one. Just going to change that to easy ease, just so that everything matches up in the timing. So just right clicking on that, going to easy ease. And it's just a case of going through and just getting these corner pins to line up properly, and just to get them to behave themselves. So there you get the cylinder kind of swinging away. What I will do is, for something like this, the perspective on this cylinder here would be wider than it is on this one. So I'm just going to double click on that one, and then at this halfway point I'm just going to make it a little bit wider, just to make it a little bit more realistic. It's not perfect perspective, this is just very much a rough thing. Um, but again, there I'm going to select that cylinder, just make it a bit wider. I'm going to take this one, make that one a bit wider as well. Just going to make sure that the animation is looking, the perspective is looking as good as it can do. Let's just take these corner pins again. So there you have a rough idea of it swinging from pointing at you and then away from you in there. So this was my original one. It's a bit thinner, the perspective is a bit more obvious as well, so the end is much wider at the beginning and it's much thinner at the end as well, and it created a much better probably effect than the one I've just created there. In order to create the leg itself, all I did was, if I bring in, if I just create a demonstration one, I've got a null object here, and that was just created by using layer, new, and then null object. I'll just create a new on there, and I'm just going to rename it to test. And in there, I'll bring in my comp, which is my new cylinder in here, and just show you how I linked up the null object to the cylinder in order to make it turn. So I'm just going to rename that test cylinder. And I just went into effects and presets, expression control and slider control in there, and I renamed that to, let's just rename it to tube control. And I'll take my, I put it on the wrong thing, that was very silly. Let's make sure I've got it on the test null object in here. So I've got my test null object in there. I'm going to apply the slider control to it, and if I go to effects, right click on that and go tube control, and then in that tube control slider, what I can do is take my test cylinder, going to press Alt Control T to create a time remap, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to press Alt and click on the stopwatch, which will give me the expression. And from there, what I can do is I can drag the pick whip to the tube control slider. Just make sure that's opened up on there. So drag the pick whip over the slider control there, and that means that when I move the slider, you'll see it moves very quickly and spins round there. Well, the reason for that is I need to divide this by 100, because the value that the slider has is 0 to 100, and in this instance it means 0 to 100 seconds. Our tube there has, the comp duration is a second long, so as soon as I hit 1 on there when I originally did it, it'll just flip through the entire duration of the comp. So I needed to divide that expression by 100 in order to get the full range, and that's where I get the full range, and I can shift the tube around and rotate it that way. So in doing that, I mean, there are a couple of glitches in there, but this is really just a case of using this for reference in order to be able to work out foreshortening, like I've done with this one, and I simply parented the lower tube to the upper tube, and I've animated things like the scale of the tubes and the rotation of the tubes in order to get this walking leg effect. But the crux of being able to swing the tube forward and backwards is done by using this null object and the comp attached to the slider. And as I say, you can create much more complex animations with it. For instance, with this guy running here, it's just it's exactly the same system, just applied to the arms and the legs, and keyed in exactly the same manner. What I've done is I've built up the legs where I've created an upper arm and a lower arm using exactly the same principle. You can see it's pretty basic kind of animation in there. I've then created a full arm and an arm swing animation for that, so it swings backwards and forwards. I've also put a torso in there that twists, and I'm using these kind of like little curves and things, the hair, in order to indicate which way things are twisting. It indicates the surface deformation as it deforms, so I can indicate whether things are twisting round by turning these ones over to the right hand side, moving those ones to the left. Gives me some indication of if the hips are swinging left and right. I've done the same with the upper and lower leg, created a leg move which then just animates through a single leg swing, and then built it up in the final comp so that by taking those moves, the leg swings and the arm swings and the torso twist, I can then offset those to make a left and a right leg, flip them as well so I get a left and a right leg, and offset the animation. This is where you get the run cycle from. So it's a kind of quite a long overview of how to put that together. It's not the be all and end all. It's not going to be a system that you may use all the time, but it is quite a handy system for certainly using characters that are running towards the viewer, and it's a useful system for working out things like perspective and foreshortening as well.